So, Dario, inequality of overconsumption. Why should we care?
Well, so far, inequality has risen up the global agenda. The fact that there's the richest 1% after the financial crisis, it's not the headlines, people are a lot more aware of it. On the other hand, levels of consumption at the moment are unsustainable. We have the indicators, whether it's climate change or species going extinct at an alarming rate. So we know we need to deal with these challenges. But what isn't talked about as much is dealing with them at the same time. So just to give you some examples of why we need to do that. So if governments were to take action to reduce inequality, say by taxing the rich more to redistribute wealth, what would that mean for people's consumption? Would they consume more? Would they take more flights, for example, increase their carbon footprint? On the other hand, if governments were to try and tackle overconsumption, so to try and make consumption more sustainable and within the amount that we need to get down to have a planet that we can all live on, how is inequality factored into that? For example, if they were to impose a carbon tax, so to make it more expensive for you to get your petrol into your car and then burn those fossil fuels, the richest can afford to do that. The question is, would they be able to afford that indefinitely because their wealth is increasing faster than the rate of growth, as shown by Thomas Piketty? So the richest are not affected in the same way as everyone else. So that's why inequality and overconsumption need to be dealt with together, and because people need to be targeted differently. The rich and the middle classes and the working classes need to be targeted differently.
So I suppose there is an increasing movement in economics and in policy to financialise the entire system, put value on ecosystems, value on carbon emissions, value on different parts of the environment. Is there a risk then that these high net worth individuals, so the wealthier, can afford to damage the planet or exploit particular natural resources, whereas the rest of us can't afford to do that? So could this inequality become an inequality of exploitation as well as just a wealth inequality?
Yeah, so I mean, so far we don't know what the ecological footprint of productive investments are, so investments in a coal mine or in drilling for oil, but probably a lot of those investments and assets are held by the richest, and that's where they derive a lot of their wealth from. So in a way, the richest are the ones who are already benefiting the most from overexploiting the Earth's natural resources, and so conceivably that could continue.
So just in thinking about some of the solutions then and some of the things you could do, in the past we've had levels of ultra wealthy individuals who've been ultra wealthy, and we've seen them invest in the future, so Henry Ford and great names of industrial endeavour. We see some of those, and you mentioned Gates as one of the people who does invest some of the wealth in some of these solutions, and there are others that do that. Is there a class of high net worth individual who try and solve some of these problems and some others that don't? Can we just rely on those individuals to do the right thing, or do you think we do need to do something more dramatic and intervening?
So if we just take the example of Bill Gates, he's an interesting case of the benefit of relying on the richest to do the right thing and also not. So he has said that he will invest billions in renewable energy, but at the same time he still has a lot of investments in fossil fuels. So yes, we can rely on the richest to do the right thing, and a lot of them are aware of climate change and the ecological crisis and need to take action, and some of them are. But we can't just rely on them to do it voluntarily. And so far, a lot of policies, for example, that aim to provide information on how to make your consumption more sustainable, they rely on individuals to voluntarily take action. And I really believe at this stage, given the gravity of what we're facing of dangerous climate change and the species are going extinct at such a fast rate, I think it is dangerous to rely on the richest to voluntarily take action. It's time for governments to step in and to ensure that people take action, so that, including the richest, so that we stay within the planetary boundaries.
And you're talking about tackling, or the need to tackle, both inequality and consumption at the same time. And the last time the governments tackled inequality and consumption and brought them both down significantly That was the Second World War, and prior to that it was the First World War, so inequality was about the level it is now, and consumption was on an upward trajectory. Then both came down. Do you think it's possible to do this without that global urgency, or without the additional impetus that a war gives us?
Well, so part of the problem, which will sound obvious, is that we need to reduce inequality because it's so extreme, and that has to happen. But part of the reason why that's a problem for then trying to take global action or in countries to reduce ecological footprints is that the richest, whether it's their willingness to pay and therefore judging what should happen by how much people spend, and the richest have the most money, so they would then be able to dominate what happens in a society, or whether it's the fact that they just have more money, so that, for example, if a carbon tax is imposed, they're more likely to be able to get by. We're at a point where extreme inequality is actually hurting the chances of countries, whether it's at the national level or even within different sectors of the population, to take action. It's actually undermining that, because the richest effectively can be considered to live in a kind of bubble where they can, on the one hand, ignore the ecological crisis, so whether that's they suffer less from air pollution, for example, but on the other hand, they also have more resources when they are affected. So, for example, when Superstorm Sandy hit the eastern coast of the United States in 2012, the richest, of course, were affected as well as the poorest, but they got their houses and electricity back a lot quicker than the poorest. But also, what's interesting is what happened afterwards. There's no data to confirm who actually bought backup generators, but after Superstorm Sandy there was a spike in purchase of these backup generators, which the best ones cost around $10,000, to give you an idea, and that would mean that if another hurricane was to arrive, those people who had those backup generators would be able to, not to completely ignore the fact that the hurricane happened and their house might be damaged, but to survive better and to continue to have access to electricity, to a mobile phone, for example, which is crucial at a time of a national disaster.
I mean, I think because there are some within the emergency services or infrastructure providers looking at something like Superstorm and Sandy, who may argue that actually part of the reason that it's not the reason, but part of this response by people after a crisis like that to rebuild infrastructure, you need this stratification across society where some people are able to afford to repair quickly and others it takes longer, because we don't have enough engineers, we don't have enough skilled labour force to be able to do all the repairs if we had to respond all together. So the wealth stratification is just a one way of prioritising our responses. I don't know whether it's the appropriate way of prioritising our responses, but that certainly seems to be the way we prioritise at the moment. The people who are insured can instantly respond, and those who don't, as in New Orleans, takes years, if not decades, to respond. I don't know if you've got any final comments on something that sort of, the wealth is our priority to respond at the moment.
Yes, I mean, so when there is a disaster, of course, it's the best situations for people to be able to recover as quickly as possible. But it shouldn't be that only the richest or the middle class, say, are the only ones who are able to do that. So to give you another example of the importance of linking inequality and consumption is when Superstorm Sandy hit the New York area, a lot of the toxic landfills and chemical facilities which are based in poorer neighbourhoods, those chemicals, etc., they, due to the floodwaters, they spread into those poorer areas. So it was a kind of warning, to highlight the fact that the poorest were living in those areas where they were more likely to suffer from environmental injustice, environmental pollution, and then when the disaster hit, not only did they not have more resources to recover, but they were also hit by this, also by the fact that they were located near to these toxic land sites. And the richest are just not in that situation, and ultimately that's not fair, but it's not sustainable in the long term when more disasters are probably on their way because of climate change.
Thanks.